Let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for the Sabbath and the wonderful number for Christ and the work that he has done in creating this universe as a witness of his character and in the giving of the gospel in the way that he has through symbols, through structure, but also, Lord, in the way that he works upon our hearts in these mysteries that we will be studying throughout all eternity. And we're thankful, Lord, for your Holy Spirit that has brought this conviction in our lives of understanding your truth, understanding the Sabbath. And we thank you, Lord, that we can enter into your rest as we cease from our own works as you did from yours. Help us to experience the joy of your salvation. And we ask, Lord, that as we read here this evening on 9/11, that you can correct any errors that we may have, that you'll help us to understand your truth. And we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So, again, apologize for getting carried away. Now, we're continuing this study of Derek, the paper that he wrote, Derek Williams, the one dealing with 9/11. And I know he's written a more recent paper, which is an apology, which is very powerful as well. And one of the things I pointed out in this paper is basically the spirit in which he responds is what I think that we should be doing as we engage with people who differ with us, is that, we need to remind them of the things that God has taught us, but we don't need to remind them of their defects of character or anything like that, because God is asking us to work in a certain spirit, the way that Christ has told us to engage in one another, and also the way that Ellen White says they studied after October 22nd, 1844. And so, we really believe that as we go over and examine the past, that this will give us understanding of the present, the experience that we're in now, and also the future. Now, to try to understand the context of what we're going to be studying today, if somebody hadn't seen the last two studies where we read through Derek's paper, if you need to read his paper, you could always email it to theodorejames.turner@gmail.com. So it's nice to have the whole paper and read it. Now, he was responding to a WhatsApp discussion on the general chat, so the FFA chat, where there was questions regarding 9/11 of how we to understand it. Now, the person that he was discussing with, there was actually two different people, Ed Weech and Larry Daughtry. And in discussing that, they were coming from a different direction. Now, Larry Daughtry, this is what we're going to be addressing here now, is some of his views, and we did look at them a little bit last time. We mentioned it, where he takes February 26th, 1993, as the beginning of the third will. So that's where he would look at it as. And I think there is some merit to what he's talking about. That is, I don't think that we could just dismiss the first attack on the World Trade Center with this bomb that was in the parking garage under the building, under the North Tower, that could actually, if the van had been 30 yards over, would have taken down the North Tower and it would have fallen into the South Tower. So the World Trade Center could have come down on February 26, 1993, but God didn't allow that to happen because it wasn't the time for that event. And that event, of course, was to happen slightly differently, according to Testimonies 9, starting on page 11. And also, in understanding what that event is, one of the issues has to do with the restraint and the loosening of Islam. And so we looked a little bit, and we're going to go back at that. We're look back at it again. We looked a bit at the periods of the first woe under the fifth trumpet, and also that there's two periods of 150 years. And then the second woe under the sixth trumpet. And now we're under the seventh trumpet, and under the seventh trumpet is the third woe. And we see that as beginning at 9/11, but it begins with a restraint. So I'm going to read some of this here, and then I will draw these things out again. So it's here he talks about, Brother Larry brought a challenge to the application of 9/11 as the beginning of the third woe. So that's Larry Daughtry, not Larry Hine. In concluding our study, I want to address his concerns and establish the aforementioned application, talking about how we apply. One is the restraining and loosening of the four winds, which he talks about with the August 11th, 1840. So maybe I could just read that paragraph. The pioneers understood these four angels to signify the power of the four sultans at the commencement of the second woe. It is not a coincidence that at the end of the second woe on August 11th, 1840, it was the four great European powers which were responsible for restraining Islam at the end of the second woe. Thus, we have the number four connected with the beginning and end of the second woe. In the third woe, we have four angels marked as restraining and then loosening the four winds, which I would argue is a progressive loosening that occurs from 9/11 onward during the time of the seventh trumpet until Christ returns. Now, we're just jumping into something here that maybe we're not prepared to look at. We haven't thought about these things for a while. So what I want to do is draw this out and sort of remind us how we understand these things. And now, one of the things, of course, that we know is in dealing with the seven trumpets, the first four trumpets are addressing judgments against Western Rome, and then the fifth and sixth trumpets deal with judgments against Eastern Rome, and then the seventh trumpet is judgments against modern Rome, right? So we have this understanding in this message. So we're going to have here, I'm not going to go over, of course, the first four trumpets. We know that we can take those first four trumpets and also make an application of them to our time, but I'm not going to do that. So this is the fifth trumpet. We got the sixth trumpet. And this fifth trumpet, where we start this is in 606 AD. And that would be seen on the 1843 chart, the rise of Mohammedanism. So there's this 606, and then you have 632, which is Abu Bakr. However you spell Bakr, something like that's a Q, Abu Bakr. I can't remember how to spell his name. But this is 632 AD. And there's going to be a period of 150 years here, which is the 5 months that's mentioned in Revelation 9, verse 5. So, and this is the command of Abu Bakr. So this first period of 5 months, we came to understand going from Abu Bakr's command to the first treaty of Constantinople. And then there's a period of time here in between, and then you're going to have another period of 5 months, which we would then call the second woe. So this is the second woe. And of course, we know this goes from 1299 to 1449. And in these, even in this one, there is a restraint. Abu Bakr puts a restraint upon Islam itself, which we apply here as well. So this period of 150 years that has a restraint on it, this also has a restraint that they can hurt but not kill. And that is, these are going to be judgments against Eastern Rome, and Constantinople, which is the capital, under this period of time is not conquered by Islam. So Constantinople is the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, and it's not till you get to the, pardon me, this is the first woe. So, yeah, this is the first woe. Somebody should have corrected me. So this is the first period of 150 years, and this is the second period. But this second period is the first woe, not the second woe. And then you're going to have this period of 391 years and 15 days. So that period of 391 years and 15 days is the second woe. So this is just review. We know that the dates marked here are July 27th, 1299, and July 27th, 1449. Now, when Lich did this, of course, he didn't really think about Julian, Gregorian, or anything. But actually, this is a Gregorian date. This is a Julian date. Because if you look at the biblical date, the 26th day of the fourth month, this would actually be, the Julian date would be July 18th. But the Gregorian date would be July 27th. And so we're taking the biblical date, but we're moving from Julian to Gregorian. And then we know if we were to go before these 15 days, you got these 15 days here, and you go to this date from which they count the 15 days, this would be the 26th day of the fourth month, which would be July 27th, Gregorian again. So I'm counting actually Gregorian from here, July 27th. But if I just count the biblical date, it's the same date, right? Hopefully that's just review, and it's not that important in this context of what we're talking about. And then we know we're going to have this second woe, which is going to end on August 11th, 1840. And then this is, of course, these are the trumpets. I guess I'll put it under here. And the fifth trumpet. But we got the first woe happens at the end of the fifth trumpet, the second woe at the beginning. But on August 11th, 1844, the Millerites believed that the third woe was going to begin and that the seventh trumpet would sound. And they marked this as the beginning of a close of probation that actually never occurred. So it didn't happen the way that they expected. And then we get to, of course, October 22, 1844. And this is a period of how many days? From August 11th, 1840 to October 22nd, 1844. Now, this is a wonderful manifestation of the power of God, right? So that's those 4 years from 1840 to 1844 that Ellen White talks about, which would be August 11th, 1844 to October 22nd, 1844. Anybody know how many days this is?
Would that be 1533?
Yeah, so it's 1,533 days. And Ellen White compares this period to the Exodus, and the Exodus occurred in 1533 BC. Now, I know I keep giving extra details that we don't really need, but part of the reason I give this is I want people to get these ideas in their minds of how these past histories are connected to other past histories and also connected to our time. Now, where we look at here, the seventh trumpet is, of course, going to sound here. So there's 1,533 days from the end of the second woe to the beginning of the seventh trumpet. So one of the things this shows us is that in a period of a trumpet, the woe is not the same period. So the first woe is not the fifth trumpet. It occurs in the fifth trumpet. The second woe occurs under the sixth trumpet. But again, it doesn't comprise the entire period, though it comprises almost all of it, except for these 1,533 days. And then under the seventh trumpet, Adventists like James White, Joseph Bates, Hiram Edson, well, I'm not so much sure about Hiram Edson, but Loughborough was the guy I was thinking of. When they refer back to the seventh trumpet, and of course, Jan Andrews, they would put the seventh trumpet here, but they also have the third woe beginning on October 22nd, 1844. What's the problem with that? Because they believed that the seventh trumpet would begin to sound and the third woe would begin at the same time. So they just said October 22nd, 1844 is the seventh trumpet. So it must be the start of the third woe. But what's the problem with that?
You mean besides the fact that the trumpet precedes the woe just a bit?
Yes. So when we look at this history, we see that there's restraints and loosenings of Islam, right? For the first and second woe. They mark.
Right.
So, here this would be a restraint. And then the beginning of the second woe is a loosening, right? Because 4 years later, they are able to destroy and conquer Constantinople. But they weren't under this point, they're restrained. Even this one's a restraint, but this is a loosening. But August 11th, 1844 is a restraint of Islam. So periods of loosening and restraints can occur in connection with Islam. So the first thing is that October 22nd, 1844, neither has a loosening or a restraint of Islam. So they're not looking at the third woe as having anything to do with Islam. But we know by looking at the charts, we look at the first woe is Islam, the second woe is Islam. So the third woe should be Islam. But they're not addressing that point in 1844. Now, are they addressing what's the word? The something of the nations. I can't remember the phrase. Dealing with the battles. Do they address that?
The troubling of the nations.
The what?
The troubling of the nations.
Something. Yeah, that's the phrase that comes to mind, but I think it's wrong. But anyway, they address this idea because we know Islam is involved in this history. It's not just at August 11th, 1844. There's these two battles, two wars going on. And Elder Jeff addresses these, and I can't remember what they're called. But these wars, these Turkish wars that were going on. And then you have the weak man of the East. So Turkey is the weak man of the East. And so this whole thing of the fall of the Ottoman Empire is going on. But there's nothing on October 22nd, 1844 that we can mark in relationship to Islam. Right? So we just can't do it. And the Millerites didn't try to do it, and the Seventh-day Adventists didn't try to do it. But in our message, as we looked at a repeat of history, so don't have a lot of room here, so we just put 1989. We know we had a time of the end, and we know that the first angel's message is going to be repeated. So the first angel's message is is empowered here on August 11th, 1840. And we also know that the second angel's message at 9/11 is going to be repeated. And that's joining the third angel that arrives here, right? So you get the third angel going till the end of time. And 9/11 is the second angel. Now, 9/11, of course, we apply to two different dates in Millerite history, so I don't have all of it in here, but we have August 11, 1840 is 9/11, as well as April 19th. So I'm not going to confuse all those issues at the present time. We'll come back to those. But the point is, 9/11, is this a loosening or a restraint of Islam? It's a trick question.
It's a restraint.
Okay, it's a restraint. There's also a loosening that happens first,
I was wondering that.
right? So there actually is a loosening and a restraint. Now, what Larry Daughtry tried to argue is that February 26th, 1993, which is that first attack on the World Trade Center and the first attack by Islam on American soil, is the loosening, and 9/11 is the restraint. And so obviously Islam is involved here. And it's interesting when you go back and you're looking at Jeff's material from this period of time. So now Jeff, in 1989, he begins studying line upon line. But in 1993, what is he doing? Does anybody know?
I don't have an answer.
He's publishes his first paper dealing with line upon line. So it's in 1993. Now in 1996, he publishes The Time of the End magazine. So I don't know how many people saw Jeff when he presented. He did a series of studies from his first paper that he published in 93. And this was back in 2018, I think at the beginning of the year of 2018, he was going over some of this older material. So like in March and April. So he was going back over this old material, his old papers, very, very simple lines. They'd have like the time of the end, the Sunday law, and the close of probation. You had this really simple line, time of the end, the Sunday law, and the close of probation as sort of his main waymarks. And as time went on, we sort of zoomed into these things. And really, our line right now is more focused upon the Sunday law, from 9/11 to the Sunday law. So we actually end up having our waymarks look like this. You take, which is not even in here, you take 9/11, and then you have the midnight cry, or midnight, I guess I could put here, midnight, the midnight cry, and then the Sunday law. So that's kind of our main line since 2016. The point is that Jeff he couldn't have understood in 1993, February 26th, he didn't have enough information to see this event as significant. And even when 9/11 occurred, it wasn't like instantaneously on that day that Jeff just sees this is August 11th, 1840. It actually takes him a few years to really grasp what 9/11 was as an event in comparing it with Millerite history. I don't know how many people were in this message back then and understanding it. Dwight, when did you come into the message?
Would have been after 2005.
Yeah, so after we had already come to understand 9/11, and there wouldn't be very many people who are in this message now who came in before 9/11. Most of those people are gone who had come in before. Now, in a sense, even though I never came into this message until 2010, I was aware of 1989 as a fulfillment of Daniel 11, verse 40b. And I was also aware when 9/11 occurred that was Testimonies 9/11. So, and that would have been just within a few days of it happening that I was aware of that. So I was aware of this history, but I didn't know about this message. And I didn't have 1989 as the time of the end. So God had people, though, that were studying, but we hadn't come into the message yet. But when we had this event, no one had that I know of, would have had the ability to sort of see this as anything. Now, Larry Daughtry long after the fact says, well, we need to go back to here to see a loosening of Islam. And I actually don't think he's wrong. I just don't think it's the waymark that he's looking for. That is, I think if you want to make a comparison to this history, I would say something like this period of 150 years and this period of 150 years. Is this the first woe? This period of 5 months from Abu Bakr's command to 782, the first treaty of, no, it's not the first woe. This is. But is this connected to the first woe? They're both in Revelation 9.
You might be able to make that as a point, but I don't see the direct connection.
Okay, so this is Revelation 9, verse 5. When it talks about the first period of 5 months, it's talking about this period of 5 months. And then in 9, verse 10, I think it is, that it talks about this period of 5 months. And we just always have thought they're the same two periods of 5 months. So Revelation 9 mentions 5 months twice, and we just think it's talking about this. But one of the things that we always note is that Abu Bakr's command is, which is 632, is this restraint of Islam. And of course, that happens with the first 5 months, but we also can apply it to this period of time. So we sort of conflate these two. We talk about Abu Bakr's command to hurt and not kill, but actually we also apply it here, that they're going to hurt and not kill. But he's actually making this command back here at this first period of 5 months. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but as a question, where does the 17th day of the 12th month play into this?
The 17th day of the 12th month?
You're going from 782 to 1299. Or excuse me, I have that wrong. That'd be 17th day of the 5th month.
Okay, the 17th day of the 5th month. Okay, I'm not sure what you're asking then. What's the 17th?
782 from 1299.
Oh, I see. You're subtracting this?
Right.
Okay. So when you take 1299 and you minus 782, you get 7. 517.
Yeah.
Right. So this period of time, this 517 years, can also be divided variously as 126 and 391, or 391 and 126.
Okay.
You're familiar with that?
Right.
Okay. And the two different dates are what are they? So I had those together. That's 908. And this one is you think I could add faster?
Where are you getting 908?
I'm just adding 126 to 782.
Oh,
Put him as musical notes.
What's that?
Put him as musical notes.
yeah, there you go.
Musical notes?
Put them as musical notes. Should be easier to add. He said.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So so this would be 1173. Right? So
Right.
we recognize that these both are symbolic years. There's events that occur in these years. This 126 and the 391 are part of that structure of, we have from October 13th, I should write neater, October 13th, 2018 to November 9th, 2019, 391.5 days. And then from June 9th, there's 126 days, right? So
Right.
this 126 and this 391 are represented here. So so anyway, we have this connection. There's a connection between this first period of 5 months and the second period of 5 months, that we can take characteristics of this and apply it to this. This is all under the fifth trumpet. And so, but we know that this is the first woe and this is not. Okay, so there's a lot of history here. I know some people are just going to get confused by all these numbers, but the main thing that we look at here is if we go to this history and we look at 9/11 and we say, well, this is the attack on the World Trade Center by Islam. Now, part of the thing is Larry Daughtry tries to say it's not. So he says, this is the attack, and this is the loosening of Islam. And then 9/11 is the restraint, but it's done with a false flag event, which I don't accept his reasoning. But I do think that there is a significance here, just like the 150 and the 150, or the 2 periods of 5 months, that this relates symbolically to this event. But it's not this event. That is, it's not the arrival of the second angel, because the second angel doesn't arrive here again, right? The fourth angel, the second angel that joins it. It doesn't happen here in 1993. This movement is not in a position to say that 1993 is the arrival of the second angel. We have to look at 9/11 as the arrival of the second angel. Now, if somebody was trying to go back here, and I'm not saying I would do that, but somebody could try to, somehow connect that this is connected with August 11th, 1840, and this is connected with April 19th. I haven't seen anybody do that. But again, I wouldn't do that, because the symbol here of Islam at 9/11 can't be ignored. So it's not just, so we need to put 9/11 as being symbolized by August 11th, 1840 and April 19th, 1844. So it's symbolized by both of those. It's connected. But this is Larry Daughtry's argument. So I just wanted to lay out what we already know and to look at Larry Daughtry's argument. And the weakness of it is that the movement itself doesn't recognize it. So he's arguing that the movement isn't even recognizing the waymark. He's the only person who recognizes it. And yet we also have the power of 9/11, of what it is as an event, that this event doesn't serve the purpose of. And remember, we know that on February 28th, 1993, Waco began and ended on April 19th in 1993 with the burning down of the buildings at Waco, and of course the murder of all those people. So we can look at some of these symbolisms here and we can connect them. Now, we also know in Millerite history, William Miller, he experiences the Battle of Plattsburgh, or the Battle of Lake Champlain, on September 11th, 1814. And 2 years later to the day is when he is converted and begins his study of the scriptures that ends in 1818. Now, so we can take that September 11th symbol and we can look at it in Millerite history, and we can say, well, whatever September 11th, 1814 is, or even September 11th, 1816, it's not a major waymark. It is a foreshadowing of something. It's connected with the increase of knowledge. And there's a lot of characteristics between the Battle of Lake Champlain, or the Battle of Plattsburgh, whichever you want to call it, that connects to symbolically the great slaughter that he talks about that happened, and God's hand, God's intervention that occurred at that battle, that we can see when God touches, it's one touch of his mighty hand that causes these buildings to fall. And that is God in his providence has allowed a series of events that he has now attached himself to as a prophetic symbol, that God has come down at 9/11. But in a sense, that happens in September 11th, 1814. But it's a foreshadowing of 9/11. And so these foreshadowings that are not the major waymarks, just like this 5 months is not the first woe, it gives us information and foreshadows this. first woe. And so we can see these types of things happening all throughout prophecy. You can see within a line, things within a line that foreshadow things that are going to happen later in a line. And we know that even this movement, the movement of the priests, the children of 9/11, is a foreshadowing. We have waymarks and so forth within our line, but we're actually not the bigger line. We're something with that is pointing forward in a typical way to the bigger line. So 9/11 cannot be diminished. And if you try to take 9/11 and move it to 1993 and say that that's the loosening of Islam, that is the arrival of the second angel, it doesn't meet those characteristics. We know that 9/11 does, but 1993 does not. Now, there's a lot of significance in 1993, but we can't give it that place in our line that to replace 9/11. So this is what he's going to go through and sort of address. So hopefully that was helpful. So just got to share the screen again. So any questions about any of that? Okay.
Not for me.
Okay. So now again, we're going to repeat what he says. Brother Larry brought a challenge to the application of 9/11 as the beginning of the third woe. In concluding our study, I want to address his concerns and establish the aforementioned application. So we just went through that. While we see the activity of Islam increasing prior to 9/11, my reason for marking 9/11 as the beginning of the third woe is the number 4 in connection with the 4 angels, which in turn are connected with the beginning and ending of the second woe, as I just mentioned. The natural question that arises, how can it be that 9/11 begins the third woe when Islam attacks at 9/11, and yet is immediately restrained by a USA-led world coalition? Should not the beginning of the third woe be a loosening of Islam? Does not the attack of 9/11 indicate a loosening of Islam? And yet if they are immediately restrained, how can this justify marking the third woe beginning at 9/11? So he's asking these good questions, which I partly addressed up here. And he's going to look at things a little bit differently. But one of the things which I didn't draw up there was that the beginning of the second woe is that Constantine the 11th submits to the 4 Turkish sultans to begin that second woe. And the reverse occurs at the end, which is the Turkish Sultan submitting to the 4 Christian powers. So he's using that symbol of 4 as this connection. And we also know that the second woe begins with the period of 4 years. So it's 4 years from the start of the second woe to the fall of Constantinople. So we also have the number 4 attached in that way. So these symbols are really important in understanding this. Now, we have these 4 winds.
Hi guys,
Hi, Mark.
and I am sorry. I may just we start over again. I am sorry. I am being late.
Okay, well, I'm not going to start over again.
Yes.
But I can review.
Just help me to catch up.
Yeah.
Where you're on now.
Okay, so what we're talking about is we're talking about 9/11. And 9/11 is an event that we mark prophetically because Islam attacked the United States. So we're looking at this and trying to show that what happened at 9/11 is an attack against the United States that is prophetic, that parallels August 11th, 1840, at the end of the second woe. And it's a restraint of Islam. And this is the prophecy of Revelation chapter 9. Now, he says here, Revelation 9 through 11 makes it clear. Somebody's Somebody's got their microphone on. Thanks, I think. Is it? Anyway. So Revelation 9 through 11 makes it clear that the first, second, and third woes occur in connection with this. In connection with and within the time period of the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpets, respectively. So I show that the first, second, and third woe occur within the time period. They don't compromise the entire period or comprise. They might compromise it, but they don't comprise it. However, that is not to say that the beginning and ending of the woe powers are connected with the beginning and ending of the trumpets. This is an important point. History marks that the fifth trumpet was sounding prior to the beginning of the prophetic period, attached to the first woe of 150 years, beginning on July 27th, 1299. When the first woe ended on July 27th, 1449, so did the fifth trumpet. At that same time, the second woe began concurrently with the sixth trumpet. When the second woe concluded on August 11th, 1840, at the end of the 391 years and 15 days prophetic period, the sixth trumpet, however, did not cease to sound until October 22nd, 1844. We have the inspired vision given to William Foy in 1842, found in the Adventist Pioneer Library, to inform us that the sixth trumpet was still sounding, and the testimony in the latter part of Revelation 11 to inform us that the seventh trumpet began to sound on October 22nd, 1844. So we went through that on the board. So he says the chiastic structure or prophetic mirror we see here then is a period of time during the fifth trumpet in which the first woe has not yet begun, and a period of time after the second woe ends in which the sixth trumpet is still sounding. With the second woe, of course, beginning at the same point in which the first woe ends, marking the center point of symmetry in the chiasm. With this information, we should then expect to see another chiasm in the second and third woes. That is to say, while the seventh trumpet begins on October 22nd, 1844, the third woe must begin at some point after the seventh trumpet. This structure would have October 22, 1844 as the center point of symmetry between the chiasm of the sixth and seventh trumpets. So he's putting October 22nd, 1844 as the sixth and seventh trumpet as a period of time from the end of the sixth trumpet, this period of 153 days, and going from October 22nd, 1844 to September 11th, 2001. Right, so that's going to be the beginning of the third woe. This in and of itself does not prove 9/11 to be the third woe. Now, I actually do have a mathematical construction that shows why 9/11 is the third woe. I'm not going to go through that now. It's very complicated, and I'll do it some other time. As the third woe could begin at any point in time after October 22nd, 1844, in order to fulfill this structure. So he's saying he's not having a time element in that structure. He's just having the basic shape of it. Woe, period with no woe within the sixth trumpet, and then in the seventh trumpet, a period with no woe, and then the third woe would begin. What allows us to pinpoint 9/11 as the beginning of the third woe are the prophetic markers already mentioned, which connect Islam with the four winds restrained by the four angels at 9/11. The message of the sealing angel in Revelation 7:3, who ties in his work with the second woe of Revelation 9:4 in its prefiguring of the increased destruction brought by Islam against Babylon after the sealing is accomplished. The characteristic of Islam to strike suddenly and unexpectedly with explosives, as it did on 9/11, and repeat of Millerite history from 1989 to the Sunday Law, which demands that the four angels' message should be empowered through the restraint of Islam in an event marked by the number four, specifically four angels. So this is pretty difficult sentence. So we're going to kind of have to, the one sentence is very, very long. So we have to unpack it a bit. Now, we already really looked at this idea, but we know that there are these restraints. And here he's going to be talking about the four winds. So what happens? What are the four winds? What are these? And why are we connecting them with Islam? He already addressed this earlier in the paper. Anybody with thoughts on this? So he spent a lot of this paper dealing with these winds and showing that they represent Islam, that Islam is represented by wind. But we also have here four winds. Which wind symbolizes Islam specifically?
East.
The east wind.
East.
Right. So why are the four winds being restrained? Why not just the east wind being restrained? Anybody have any answer to this question?
Well, there was the quote from Sister Wade where she says, hold, 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 or something.
Okay, so we got the four holds. Okay. And we're connecting, she connects it to where? Why do the winds have to be held?
To allow the saints to be sealed in the forehead.
Right. So if we go to Revelation chapter 7, right, this is, after these things I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. So we have some language here that he pointed us that connects us with Revelation 9. Because remember, Revelation 9 had the command of Abu Bakr. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree. Only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. So this is referring to a history way back in the fifth trumpet, right? Near the beginning of the fifth trumpet, Abu Bakr's command. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So this is that first period of 150 years where we have this command of Abu Bakr. Now, so we have some of similar language. And so, but here it's going to say that there's four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. So when we're dealing with the fifth trumpet, what is the fifth trumpet addressing? It's judgments against who? The sixth trumpet also addresses it. The fifth and sixth, the first four trumpets are judgments against Western Rome, and the fifth and sixth trumpets are judgments against who?
Eastern Rome.
The Eastern Rome, right? And specifically, it's going to be dealing with Constantinople. Now, so the seventh trumpet is addressing judgments against modern Rome. Now, Eastern Rome is only a part or 1/3 of the Roman Empire. But when you're dealing with the judgments against modern Rome, what does modern Rome comprise? What part of the earth? So the judgments against modern Rome are judgments against who? Is it universal in its scope?
No.
Okay, it's the Catholic Church. So what does the Catholic mean?
Universal.
universal, right? So
Worldwide.
even though the papacy is one part of Babylon, that these judgments that are coming in our time are addressing the entire world. And of course, that's what the four angels are dealing with. They're dealing with these four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth. Now, we could also look at it and say that it's not the whole world, because modern Rome, in this case, would be the papacy connected with the United States. And of course, we have other powers that exist, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So the beast and the false prophet are only 2/3 of the world. But the whole world is involved in these events, where that wasn't the case when you deal back with Constantinople and Islam in the early in the 7th century, right, in 7th and 8th century, and later on into the 13th century. That was 15th century as well. So those are events that are different. That they're dealing with a smaller portion of Rome, 1/3 of Rome. But in this case, modern Rome comprises all of Rome, right? Not just east and west. It's all of Rome. Now we also have this symbol of the seal of the God. So we had that in Revelation 9. But here I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God in their foreheads. So in this context, what history is this talking about? Is it talking about the history with Abu Bakr?
No.
It's talking about our history at the end of the world. And so the ones in Revelation 9, verse 4, are not addressing the people at the end of the world with the seal of God. They're addressing Christians who are keeping the Sabbath in that period of time. But it becomes a symbol, right? So we can take the history from what happened under the first and second woe, and we can now bring them over to our history that is addressed here in Revelation 7. And so this is the sealing of the 144,000. But we can see that these same symbols are being used. But in this case, it's not just the east wind. It's the four winds are being held. So this is the destruction that's going to come upon the world. The angering of the nations is the word I was thinking of, that was happening in Ellen White's day, is also happening in our day. Right? So it wasn't the troubling of the nations, but the angering of the nations. And so we see that happening here. Now, when we look at what's happening in the world today, how would you describe it? What's occurring presently? I know that's a difficult question because there's a lot happening. But how would you describe, if you're going to try to sum it up in some kind of biblical sense, what's happening in the world today? Anybody? Since 9/11, what has happened?
You got a restriction of freedoms.
Okay, so a restriction of freedom. So 9/11 is the restraint of Islam, right? So we know that we're under a period of restraint from a biblical perspective. But that's God who's restraining those things. And what is he restraining? What are these four winds that he's restraining? And we're seeing that they're losing. What's that?
The winds of war and winds of strife that would blow on the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we can always say, well, there's always war, there's always strife. But we're in the year 2020. What do we see happening in 2020 that we have not seen for a long time? This is something that that people like Avro Manhattan, who wasn't a Christian that I know of, maybe he was some kind of a Christian, but he's a secular writer. What did he really say was going to happen at the end of the world, or not at the end of the world, but basically he's describing what's happening at the end of the world, dealing with the United States, Russia, the papacy. What is that describing?
Canada.
Okay, so we have these powers, and what are they doing?
They're trying to ascend.
What's that?
They're striving for ascendancy in the world.
Right, so they're fighting against each other because these powers want to control the world. And so what's being restrained? What happened at 9/11? Why did 9/11 happen? According to Revelation chapter 7. Why did it happen? Okay, let's read this paragraph here that we already read. I think we read this one. Right, so this says, this in and of itself does not prove 9/11 to be the third woe, as the third woe could begin at any point in time after October 22nd, 1844, in order to fulfill this structure. What allows us to pinpoint 9/11 as the beginning of the third woe are the prophetic markers already mentioned, which connect Islam with the four winds restrained by four angels at 9/11. The message of the sealing angel of Revelation 7, who ties in this work with the second woe of Revelation 9:4. So we see how those 7:3 and 9:4 are tied together in its prefiguring of the increased destruction brought by Islam against Babylon, so modern Babylon in our time, after the sealing is accomplished. So what's being restrained? So this is who is being restrained? I mean, Islam's being restrained, but what else is being restrained?
Devil.
Okay, well, in a sense, the satanic power is being restrained in some ways with Islam, but God is using Islam, right?
Right.
So if 9/11 hadn't happened, what would have happened? I know that's a crazy question, but why did God have Islam or allow Islam to attack the United States on September 11th, 2001?
Put a restraint on Rome.
To put a restraint on Rome. So even though Islam is being restrained, God is using Islam to restrain what's happening with these other nations. So that's why there's the four winds are connected, because the east wind is Islam. So what are the other three winds? Who's being restrained by each of these winds? We maybe never think about this, but are there three powers, other powers involved? Is the United States being restrained? Is Rome being restrained? Is the United Nations being restrained? We can say yes to all of those. So these four winds, even though they're restraining, only one of them is a restraint of Islam. That's the east wind, because Islam is the east wind. But we connect it with 9/11 because when Islam attacks, it causes a restraint. Now, part of this restraint is that God is restraining these nations, but God is also restraining his judgments as well. That is, there's destruction that's going to come upon the earth because God himself is going to bring destruction. But so you have this great controversy between God's destruction, so to speak, of sinners and the satanic destruction against God's people. You have this two different powers battling out over God's people, which is what the seal of God is about. You have both the seal of God, which is the Sabbath, and the mark of the beast, which is Sunday, right? So if we look at this and we look at this restraint, it's not as simple, as this is just a restraint of Islam. There's actually a lot of restraining going on because God wants to seal his people. And what is happening right now with this movement? What is the point or the purpose of this movement since 9/11.
The building of the characters, the revealing of the characters, so that those that reveal a character that is reflecting Christ can be sealed.
Right. And so this is about the seal of God. Our message is about the seal of God. Right? Now, specifically to Adventists, we have to receive the seal of God prior to the Sunday law. But that seal of God, of course, is going to go to the world after the Sunday law. And people could be being sealed now before then, but as a symbol on a line. And so we have a message which is about the sealing. Because the reason why God restrained these four winds is because a work has to be accomplished. Now, if we think about it, remember Ellen White says that the fourth angel, which is the second angel, so the Revelation 18 angel, it has to join the third angel. Well, why does it have to do that? According to the Spirit of prophecy.
Well, the fourth angel doesn't it empower the third angel?
Right. It empowers the third angel, right? So the third angel's message needs to be empowered. And that's because you can't have a third without a first and a second. So the first and second angel's messages had been rejected. And so in our history, in the repeat of the parable of the 10 virgins, which is to the very letter, is this repeat of Millerite history. And that's what he says right here. And the repeat of Millerite history from 1989 to the Sunday law, which demands the first angel's message should be empowered through restraint of Islam, an event marked by the number 4. Now he says here, the first angel's message is empowered, which it is. It's empowered, but it's also the arrival of the second angel too, right? So we know that there are 2 events that 9/11 marks. And this is a repeat of Millerite history. So we're repeating both August 11th, 1840 with 9/11 and also April 19th, 1844. And so in order for the third angel to be empowered, you need the second angel, but you also need the first, right? So he's just addressing here the first in that sentence. So the last point should be understood in context of the chiastic structure that we just identified. That is to say, that if we can see a chiasm between the second and third woes, as far as their beginning in relationship to the respective trumpets, then we could also expect that the events marking the end of the second woe and the beginning of the third woe should have characteristics in line with the chiastic structure. As noted already, the restraining of Islam in 1840 by the 4 great European powers. And remember, this is about back in the 1840s, was about the angering of the nations, right? This was this idea, and the angering of the nations is now connected with the 4 great European powers. It has its parallel to in the restraining of Islam immediately after 9/11 by the 4 angels of Revelation 7. So he's paralleling what happened in August 11th, 1844, which is a restraint because of this chiastic structure, with the restraining of Islam immediately after 9/11 by the 4 angels of Revelation 7. So another chiastic element in this is that in the time period preceding the end of the second woe, we see a history of gradual decline in the persecuting activity of Islam. So, so at the end of the second woe, obviously there's this decline. Islam is not, it's not persecuting. Now, this is actually kind of a simplification. The history of Islam is very interesting, very complicated. There's lots of different events and that we often don't address. So he says this would be expected with the giving of the deadly wound in 1798 as represented by the Ottoman powers. So we know that at the time of the end, preceding the second woe, that we see Islam is being weakened. So 1798, the papacy has been weakened because it receives a deadly wound. And so at that same time, the Ottoman power also becomes weakened. Its purpose has been removed. Does that make sense to people and what he's saying there? It's something we don't usually think about. Okay, so this decline continued until a decided restraint was put on Islam. With the beginning of the third woe at 9/11, we see a restraint followed by a gradual loosening of Islam until the second coming. Thus, we see a mirror opposite chiastic structure in the events preceding the end of the second woe and the events succeeding the beginning of the third woe. So, and that's what we've seen happening in our history since 9/11. So they put a restraint on Islam, but is Islam increasing in its loosening? Are we seeing a gradual loosening of Islam?
Yes.
Yeah, so we see that. Now, a person could argue, of course, that prior to 9/11, Islam had begun to do some things, and one of it had to do with the wars with Afghanistan. So what was happening in Afghanistan? Russia was involved as well, and there's a whole history you can go back even through the 70s with Iran and so forth. So there was a lot of things happening with Islam. So somebody could just say, well, 9/11 is, not as significant as some of these other events. I mean, that's sort of the argument Larry Daughtry would use. But obviously, Islam is beginning to have to ascend, right? It's going to start doing its work. But it's at 9/11 that you have this marked restraint. So you need that restraint. That's the way mark we're looking for. We're not looking for just, battles with Islam attacking, in different countries and what's happening in Afghanistan. That's, even though that's Islam, of course, is developing to the point where when it attacks the United States at 9/11, there needs to be this marked restraint, and that gives us that way mark. And so we can see the same if we look at the history from 1798 all the way through. I mean, August 11th, 1840 is just the restraint of Islam that ends the second woe, but it doesn't mean that Islam is not doing things before or after. There's lots that happens with Islam all through the whole history. So he says here, in like manner, we have already shown that a mighty angel descended on 9/11, the angel of Revelation 18. There are marked characteristics shared by the first angel of Revelation 10 and the second angel of Revelation 18. Both are referred to as mighty angels, and both cry with a loud voice. So the revelation of the first angel of Revelation 10 is addressing what? What is Revelation 10 about? Just to remind us. Revelation 10 is what? How would we just describe Revelation 10? Mighty angel coming down. We have this little book open, seven thunders.
Preach the message again.
So this is Millerite history, right? That's Revelation 10. Millerite history. And so he's comparing Revelation 10 with Revelation 18. So is Revelation 10 about Millerite history? What's Revelation 18 about? And Revelation 14 is about Millerite history as well. So the three angels' messages. So Revelation 18 is also about a repeat of Millerite history. So Revelation 18 is repeating Revelation 10 and Revelation 14, but he's focusing upon Revelation 10 here. Because he says both are referred to as mighty angels and both cry with a loud voice. Therefore, when the angel of Revelation 18 descends to empower the first angel's message in our history, we should expect it to have a connection with the third woe. Since in Millerite history, the power of the papacy was declining, it would naturally follow that the power of Islam in the second woe would also be declining. But in our history, the power of the papacy is increasing. So then the power of Islam in the third woe must also be increasing. And we can definitely see that, the parallel between that. The waymark of the third woe at 9/11 must then be the beginning of the third woe, not its end, right? So if you were arguing that in 1993, that the third woe began with a loosening, then September 11th would be the end of the third woe because it would be its restraint. But we're arguing that 9/11, September 11th, 2001, is the restraint of Islam that marks the beginning of the third woe. So he's making some very good points here. And while an immediate restraint was placed on Islam at 9/11, the power of Islam, though held in check, continued to rise as jihadist attacks grew around the world, along with the growth of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. This brings us to our next point of consideration. Now, some of us aren't as familiar with Islam and the different groups that exist within Islam. And I get confused even though I've read lots on it. Beezer, if I was a Muslim, I'd probably understand this stuff really well. But the rise of Wahhabism and its associated Salafi jihadism at the beginning of the 19th century in Saudi Arabia was an Islamic fundamentalist revival reform movement that advocated physical jihad in the form of active warfare against foreign aggressors in the Islamic Holy Lands and against non-Muslims in general around the world. The uprising of this sect brought the Wahhabi war between the Pasha of Egypt and the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia, who formed the first Saudi Arabian state. This Saudi Arabian state, which had formerly been under the Ottoman rule until the rebellion of the Wahhabists, I don't know, I think that's spelled wrong, was crushed by the Ottoman forces of Egypt in 1818 in the Wahhabi War. So this is really interesting. What's 1818 about?
Second angel's message before the midnight cry.
Well, 1818 is the increase of
I'm
knowledge.
sorry.
Increase of knowledge with the first angel's message.
Right.
Right. So we can see 1818, that's from Millerite history, and we take Deuteronomy 18:18 and we connect that to Miller, because that's when he came to understand within about 25 years that the world would come to an end and Christ would return. So in 1843. But this Wahhabi war, most of us are not familiar with it. Now, Jeff has gone through this a little bit. Some of these wars that were going on with the Ottoman Empire and with Egypt, and of course with Saudi Arabia. But it's very involved. All the stuff that was happening here in the 1840s was building up to what's happening now, right? So they're connected. The ideology of the Wahhabi movement continued, however, and ended up strongly influencing jihadist groups many years later, most notably Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in the Levant. Al-Qaeda was gaining prominence in the years leading up to 9/11 and had already become a target of the US and other allied governments through their counter-terrorism units. The point we are noting here is that there is a relationship, which I believe is not coincidental, in that Wahhabism and its teaching of continual jihad, which had gradually declined under the Ottoman Empire, was seen to be rising in the years prior to the restraint of Islam at the end of the Second Woe. In parallel fashion, the rise of Wahhabism is noted in the activity of its adherents in the decades prior to 9/11 and the beginning of the Third Woe. This brings another historical parallel between the end of the Second Woe and the beginning of the Third Woe. So it's very profound stuff that he's dealing with. I know that not all of us are familiar with all these details, but we can see definitely the parallels. In summary, the vast prophetic evidence which ties 9/11 to August 11th, 1840, gives us authority to link the second and third woes through these waymarks, not the least of which evidence is the repeat of Millerite history, The primary reason we can mark the third woe beginning at 9/11 rather than ending at 9/11 is the fact that all of the woe powers are direct judgments by God against the apostate Roman power. And because of this, the third woe must begin in answer to rising Roman power and their persecution of God's people. The prophetic and historical record indicates that the Roman power achieved a dramatic victory, an increasing rise to power in conjunction with the satanic threefold union in the events of 1989 and thereafter. The prophetic record also indicated that the threefold union was ready to persecute God's people at 9/11, but were turned out of the way by the ass of Bible prophecy through its attack against the false prophet of Bible prophecy, the apostate Protestant USA. While the restraint of Islam, prophetically symbolized by the restraint of the four winds, immediately after 9/11 gives a prophetic marker to tie in with the events connected with the second woe of August 11th, 1840, and the repeat of Millerite history in our history. The restraint can also be identified historically in the war on terror against the rising Wahhabi jihadists, and prophetically as the beginning of an armed conflict between the threefold union of modern Babylon and Islam, fulfilling the prophecy of Ishmael in Genesis 16:12. The role of Islam as a scourge against spiritual Babylon, and the role of Islam in protecting God's people, which in our history occurs during the sealing time, which began on 9/11, thus can be seen the connection between Ezekiel 37:9 and the events of 9/11. So he's going back to Ezekiel 39, which is prophesy to the wind, right? So that is connected with, now when we connect to the prophesying to the wind is doing what in Ezekiel 37:9? What does the wind do in Ezekiel 37? You got the valley of dry bones. And so he prophesies to the bones, right? Which is line upon line. And the prophesying to the wind does what?
Brings them to life.
Brings them to life, right? Now, of course, this is talking about God's people, but God's people are not line upon line per se, right? But there's a message that's connected with God's people. So God gives a message that's going to be what we would call a reformation, right? So what happens from 1989 to 9/11 is a reformation. And then 9/11 then is a revival, right? That is, they come to life. That's what revive means, to bring to life or bring back to life. So we have these winds that happen at 9/11, which is the restraint of the four winds, but we also have a prophesying to the wind. And that prophesying to the wind, why are we connecting this Ezekiel 37:9 with the events of 9/11 if this is a wind that actually is God's Spirit reviving his people? Why are we connecting these? Do these not seem like different things? I'd like somebody to sort of explain this for us.
I think this is being placed in a manner which needs to be applied within our current day, not so much within the past.
Okay, so I would agree with you there. So there's, and it depends how we're looking at this, right?
Right.
So we can look at this as this movement, because I think this applies to this movement specifically, Ezekiel 37. But we know that this is in Ezekiel 37, in our studies of Ezekiel, that Ezekiel 37 is actually referring to the resurrection, right? So it's referring to a future event, but we're now looking at a typical event happening in our time. And so when it comes to this movement, 9/11, which is a restraint of Islam, which is a restraining of the four winds, we also have a prophesying to the winds. Now, the prophesying is connected to this restraint. But what is it that happens to God's people with 9/11? 9/11 does what to us? Right? What does it do? What has 9/11 done?
I always took it as a warning to be prepared.
Okay, so it's a warning, but it's also a revival, right? 9/11 revives this movement. And if you read, Testimonies 9/11 and onward, I mean, and you see what Ellen White's describing what's happening today and the events that happened since 9/11. And we see that more and more as time goes on, that she was right on about what was happening, the final events or the last events or something like that. I can't remember what the title of that chapter is. But we can see that 9/11, even though it's a restraint of Islam, you need to have God's people sealed. And so you have to have a message, which is this prophesying to the wind, which is about the sealing message. But it goes back first to this Reformation that had happened from 1989 to 9/11, is the foundation that was laid so that when 9/11 occurred, we could now understand its significance and we could be prepared with a sealing message so that the servants of God could be sealed upon their foreheads. So this prophesying to the wind is it's a restraint of Islam, but it's also a revival of God's people with an understanding of the message of the sealing. So the two have to go hand in hand. And if you were to try to apply this to 1993, could you?
No,
No, you couldn't. 1993 did not bring a revival. It doesn't connect in any way. And so Derek has done a very good job here of going over what we already understood long before in this message. Now, I see this as something that's being undone. And it's being undone wittingly, or unwittingly, I should say, not wittingly. So it's being undone unwittingly. That is, the people who are attacking 9/11 haven't realized how they're doing it. But as they deal with July 18th, they're going to be attacking 9/11.
right.
And there's no way that you cannot do it. So, and it's various ways. So one is you're going to be rejecting the type of arguments that we had, the type of methodology, if you want to use that word, the way we were studying and looking at Millerite history and looking at the woes and all these different things that led us to understand 9/11 as this waymark. Those things are being attacked. So instead of attacking 9/11 directly, they've actually attacked the methodology or the reasoning or the arguments that we have used to establish 9/11. And so if you take away the arguments that we use to establish 9/11, those ways of arguing a point, and you say, we can't use them because we used them for July 18th. We used the same reasoning. It was the same way of study, the same kind of symbols, and it's tied all to this. If you take away July 18th and you say it was an error because nothing happened, and then you say, well, we can't use numbers symbolically in this way, and we can't do this and we can't do that. Well, then you've just undermined 9/11 in an indirect way. You didn't realize you were doing it. It's unwitting. You're not thinking, I'm going to reject 9/11, but you will, because you'll have no reason or no logical basis for 9/11. Now, so we do not deny the activities of Islam prior to 9/11, but the strike at 9/11 is part of a prophetic key structure that brings perfect harmony between the scriptures here quoted, while undeniably marking the arrival of the third woe and the arrival of the sealing time, latter rain, the judgment of the living, as well as confirming the repeat of Millerite history from 9/11 to the Sunday law. Yeah, and also we know that, and Iran is mentioning that for Muslims, they look at the events of what we call the first woe as the first great jihad, and they look at the events of the second woe as the second great jihad, and they look at 9/11 as the beginning of the third great jihad. So even Islamists themselves, Muslims who are jihadists, they recognize the same events that we do for the first and second and third woes. And so this has to also be significant. They don't see the third woe as starting at 1993. They look at it as, or the third jihad, third great jihad. Yeah, and there's actually a book written by a guy named John Whitcomb, who I knew personally years ago. Talked with him a little bit on my academia chat, but he wrote a book about the third jihad, something like that. Now, he's obviously connecting it to the events of 9/11 as well, though he has some very different perspectives than we do. But the point is, people recognize that 9/11 is about this third jihad, which is the third woe. To deny the prophetic significance of 9/11 is to deny the very foundations of this movement. And those who have followed this movement closely from 2014 onward should know that every apostasy that has arisen and caused a separation in this movement prophetically, the three mud puddles of Loughborough, September 7th dream, beginning with that first separation in 2014, has in some way made 9/11 a special object of its attacks. That should tell us something about the importance of 9/11, the 9/11 waymark. There's much more light to be considered in relationship to 9/11 and its significance in this movement, as well as the role of Islam in general. To stand on the platform of this movement is an absolute requirement to understand and accept the prophetic role of Islam as taught by our pioneers, and this Alpha movement's historical understanding of 9/11. The teaching that Islam was not behind the attack of 9/11. So this is the idea of the 9/11 was an inside job. Islam had nothing to do with it. There's all kinds of stuff which people have of why, Islam had nothing to do with it. It was the false flag movement and so forth. But if you believe that Islam was not behind the attack of 9/11, this will lead to the eventual rejection of 9/11 as a prophetic marker, destroying our understanding of Islam and Bible prophecy and its relationship to end time events, which will then lead to an entire rejection of this movement, then Adventism as a whole, and eventually Christianity in its entirety. It is of that magnitude of importance. It goes without saying that the acceptance of the message of 9/11 in connection with Daniel 11:40-45 is a prerequisite to receiving the early and latter rain, to all who have opportunity to hear it. Furthermore, to doubt God's leading in the prediction of July 18, 2020 will put our feet on the slippery slope to rejecting 9/11. If we don't understand the solemnity of the times and our need of entire surrender to Christ, the conducting of our conversation in a solemn and sacred fashion, and the earnest study of the scripture for the express purpose of knowing the truth of God, that we may obey it in all humility and meekness, and then it is high time for us to awake from our spiritual lethargy, lest we should be found without lamps in our oil when the bridegroom cometh. This view, so this is from Early Writings 85, this view was given in 1847, when there were but few of the Advent brethren observing the Sabbath. And of these, but few supposed that its observance was of sufficient importance to draw a line between the people of God and unbelievers. So she's talking, of course, about the Sabbath. Now, the fulfillment of that view is beginning to be seen. The commencement of that time of trouble, here mentioned, does not refer to the time when the plague shall begin to be poured out, but a short period just before they are poured out, while Christ is in the sanctuary. At that time, while the work of salvation is closing, trouble will be coming on the earth, and the nations will be angry. So I was talking there about the angering of the nations, right? So Ellen White talks about that. So that happened in Millerite history and in our history, yet held in check so as not to prevent the work of the third angel. At that time, the latter rain, or refreshing from the presence of the Lord, will come to give power to the loud voice of the third angel and prepare the saints to stand in the period when the 7 last plagues shall be poured out. So, any comments on this? I mean, this last paragraph is absolutely amazing. How it just sums up everything we just said in a very clear way. So, any final comments? We've gone for a little bit of time here, where we'll finish in right away. Has this been enlightening to anybody? Anybody seen things that, even though they've been in this movement for a while, have seen things that they never really considered?
His paper gives a lot for us to consider at this time.
Yeah, and and it was so timely. Derek's work both in this paper and then in his newer paper, which with his apology. Because one is I've never actually seen such a good summation of 9/11 as this paper has. And I would think part of the reason of that is that it's come into clear focus because of what we experienced. That is, we may have understood some of these things in the past. We studied 9/11 and we know our message. But with what we have experienced, I think this is like a magnifying glass upon 9/11, to me, more than anything. The significance of 9/11 and the sealing and the time that we're in, it all just comes into focus and is seen much clearer, especially in relationship to this movement, which, Dwight was referring to as, the Ezekiel 37 really is referring to something within this movement. And can you expand upon what you meant by that, Dwight? Dealing with.
Not at this moment, I can't.
Okay.
It's gotten a little late in my day. I'm sorry.
Okay. So anyway, I thank everyone for the study. We're going to close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we know that we have studied your word, and we've come to understand that this movement is being guided by your hand. And we know, Lord, that there's an attack, a subtle attack of Satan that has occurred within this movement, maybe even sometimes not so subtle. And we know, Lord, that this reminder of who we are and when we are that comes from the study of 9/11 is needed at this time. We know, Lord, that there are many people who have been struggling with July 18th and the disappointment, trying to put things into context, trying to figure out where we went wrong. And we know that people have come to different decisions on how to address that. But we know, Lord, that our safety lies in our understanding of the past, both in Millerite history and throughout the scriptures, but also the past of this history of this movement. And we just ask, Lord, that the things you have shown us and your providence in leading this movement will be understood, and that they'll bring an encouragement to us. We know, Lord, that the work here that we are talking about is this work, the sealing work of the third angel. There are some people who think that we can accomplish this work without understanding 9/11 and July 18th. But we know, Lord, that without those truths, any talk of the sealing message is totally powerless. This experience that you want to give us, Lord, is not some magical experience. It's a very practical experience. And I just pray for each person that they can see that revelation of Christ, that they can know that you love them and care for them, that they can see in your word the work that you want to do in their lives, that it can bring a conviction and a power, so that they can truly confess their sins. We know that the work of the Holy Spirit right now, Lord, is extremely powerful in this movement. We just ask, Lord, that we can not do anything to hinder that work in our attitudes, in our words. So we ask for a special blessing upon this Sabbath, the meeting tomorrow morning. And we know, Lord, that this Sabbath is a special day, and the time we are living in is sacred time. Help us, Lord, to trust in you. And we ask for your healing hand upon those that are sick, your encouragement to those that are discouraged. And we ask, Lord, that you can give sight to those that are blind and are struggling to see things. Help us, Lord, to understand your truth. We thank you and we praise you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.